That's Marco D'Amico. Follow him on all your favorite socials at MN D'Amico, X, Blue Sky, and otherwise. Freak. Let's put the standings up on the board. Let's focus primarily on the Eastern Conference for a second. When we look at the top 6 teams representing the 2 divisions, they are who they are. But I'm interested to get Marco's opinion on the up-and-coming teams. Who is Montreal sweating? When we talk about rebuilding timelines, right? Everybody got over the moon with Jakub Dobeš's debut on the 28th of December when he shut down Florida, and who the Canadiens beat, and the wins they ran up on the table and how quickly they climbed the standings, right? Well, the reality is sunken in that now they are, a Penguins Flyers win away from being right there with the Buffalo Sabres. So let's talk about the timeline, Marco, about how Montreal is tracking versus the rest of the Eastern Conference. Does this 5-game winless streak bring home the reality that, no, they haven't turned the corner, or this is a blip on the radar? Sunny days are still here. How do you see this race in the Eastern Conference with Montreal and others rebuilding?
Well, okay, so in a pocket of this season, I feel like the Canadiens obviously should be a little worried. They may have a game against San Jose, a game against a game against 2 games left against San Jose, one of which is tomorrow. The one more game against the Blackhawks, another game against the Predators, 2 more games against the Sabres, another game against the Kraken, and 2 more games against the Flyers. So relatively easy schedule. In fact, predicted to be one of the easiest end of year schedules. But then again, yesterday would have been a slam dunk against the Anaheim Ducks, and they unfortunately dropped that game too. So it's about playing the games, right? And on the flip side, they still have to play the Oilers. They play the Carolina Hurricanes with Mikko Rantanen and Taylor Hall 3 times between now and then. Ditto for the Florida Panthers, who have always given them trouble. Despite winning at home, I think they'll take them a little bit more seriously this time
You're
around.
Probably right.
Right? And they still have a game against the Leafs. They still have a game against the Kings again this week. And the Devils. So it's very even, in my opinion. I don't think that the they call it the strength of schedule matter in this case. I think they're in for it regardless. They have an average schedule, but the issue is they have a team that's running out of gas. Now, this is where things go get interesting. I strongly believe, and I will state this, that the Canadiens would be in the best possible position to be something of a hybrid seller. Sell the pieces that won't matter even as soon as next year. And I don't mean to say this disrespectfully, but if you look at a guy like David Savard, I think it's clear to everyone how he's fallen off. And by next year, probably won't be someone that you would want in a regular top 6. But his experience, his value, his desire to put his body on the line is going to be valuable in the market. I'm not saying he's going to get a first, may not even get a second. But with Cody Ceci off the market, there is not that many right shot defensemen as rentals available on the market. And especially if they retain on his salary, there's a world, in my opinion, there's a world where there could be a second round pick on the table. But I think ultimately it will wind up being a third because of the way that his play has just dipped and the fact that he's been playing injured. So that makes sense. Jake Evans, like we talked about, it's a little bit murkier. It's a little bit more complicated because he can still be of value. He is in his prime. It makes a lot of sense to hold on to him. So that, no one's going to pretend like they have inside information on how the conversation is going because that never leaks in Montreal. But we do know the parameters of what each side would like. So that has to get dealt with, or else we will talk about trade. And then you look at a Joel Armia. As much as you like a Joel Armia, you have Oliver Kapanen coming up. You have Joshua Roy pushing to come up. You have Jared Davidson, who's proving himself well in Laval. And you have the ability and the opportunity cost to replace a player like that for less than what Armia makes in the summer. So in my honest opinion, if you can get anything for Armia, it would be worth it because, again, this is an individual that's, I believe he was drafted in 2011. So he's got to be, mid 30s at this point, or mid to early 30s. It's just, I don't see the fit, especially now that you have an Emil Heineman that's starting to make his name in the NHL, right? So you want to kind of diversify that a bit. So there are options to make trades. I think the one that intrigues me the absolute most, especially now given the rapid rise of the salary cap, is Mike Matheson. Not a rental.
Yeah.
But when you look at the way that the Canadiens are built, and unfortunately Mike Matheson, I think the reason why he won't be traded this year is simply because of how important he is. If he were to be traded and you trade Savard, Carrier would be the only kind of veteran player on this team, with Gouli also potentially being out for the season. Like, we don't know yet. It creates a significant question mark. So I think that if there was to be a trade, probably be in the offseason, but a name to watch because I know the teams are interested. So it's a tough thing because they don't have much to sell.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's the key. What I wouldn't put past them, though, is for them to also be open to buying, but not in the sense of like throwing picks at a rental. But I think they wouldn't put the idea of a Kirby Doc deal right now in motion if it presented itself. Especially, and I will really be clear about this, especially if the Calgary Flames continue to win. Because right now it's not looking like the Calgary Flames are going to finish in the bottom 10, which means the Canadiens would get Calgary's first round pick, which means it'll probably be somewhere between 10 and 20.
So lots of moving pieces here. So like if we take it to,
which is it's the main reason why the Canadiens haven't done anything.
Right.
Because they want to see how it plays out, but at the same time, not just on their own terms, everywhere else.
Well, that's what that was my next question is like, are they waiting to see who moves first? The first through the old cliche, the first through the wall gets it the roughest, and then everyone else can kind of walk in through the hole that they made. So like, I think it's a pertinent question about, can they keep up in the East? Do they have to be the Sharks and be the ones that are the best at forecasting the future by making the first move and everyone tries to play catch up? Like, I thought maybe that was an expectation when they moved Justin Barron for Carrier when they did to Nashville.
No, I think the Justin Barron to Carrier deal was a perfect time, perfect place scenario.
Yeah.
Nashville was looking for a younger right shot D. The Canadiens didn't see a future for Barron in that regard. And Carrier was a player that they liked, that they inquired about last year when he was a pending unrestricted free agent, and then they decided to retain him. So a couple of lessons that you can pick from Nashville in that perspective. But the idea that I have is, and we've seen it with Gorton, is patience. Let it play out. They'll tell you what you need. And I think, like you saw him on the Sick podcast with Jimmy Murphy and Pierre McGuire about a week ago, saying he'd be comfortable buying. But again, Jimmy asked that question in a very precise way, where he asked him, would he be open to buying? Absolutely, they would. They're looking to improve this team for the long term. So if there is, we saw what the Flames, for example, did with Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee. That's not your traditional buy. In fact, these are two players either under contract or a restricted free agent, or a year left on his next deal. I don't remember when it comes to Frost, but that's the kind of deal I would see the Canadiens doing. But it would have to be a higher stakes deal, which I don't necessarily think teams would be willing to do right now. Unless when
you look at the standings for a second, like, is there an organization in the Eastern Conference that you believe Montreal should be sweating a little bit? Like, whether they look at Philadelphia or they look at Buffalo, is it fair to say at this point that the Ottawa Senators are further ahead than the Canadiens are, and you don't have to worry about catching them because they've passed you? Like, they are ahead of you on the rebuild path here. So, when we look at the standings, I'm curious to get your analysis on, Pittsburgh, no, right? But Philadelphia, Buffalo, what about Columbus? Is this just one of those years with the inspirational motivation of the tragedy of the Goudreau brothers, and they just use that to fuel the fire? And that's the best story in hockey. But what do you make of that Columbus, Philadelphia, and kind of Buffalo little tripod of teams rebuilding and trying to, be good again consistently?
I think those teams are ahead because the main pieces that they acquired within their rebuild are already on their roster. I think that's the key here. So when you look at a team like Ottawa, Stützle, Tkachuk, Norris, Shabbat, Sanderson, all on the roster. And I think that Like you have your core and it's locked in, and they've been just trying to add to find it. So like the difference between the Ottawa Senators this year and the Ottawa Senators last year is they're actually getting average goals saved above expected instead of the worst in the NHL. And I think that's something you keep in mind, right? Like I believe Levi Marilainen, probably got that name wrong. I always get it wrong.
That's how I've been saying it.
Yeah, so he was lights out for them while Olmark was out. Now he just got sent down to Belleville. Olmark coming back, so they weathered that storm quite well. But they've also tightened up the defensive work under Coach Green. So like I like what they're doing. Do I necessarily see them taking another step? I don't, and I think this is where they're going to be, simply because at the time, and this is why I caution fans, at the time they had a 10th overall pick. They unfortunately decided to get cute and draft Boucher at 10th, despite him being ranked, in the second round.
Yeah.
They had a 7th overall pick, and they traded it away for a year of Alex DeBrincat. Right? Like it's when you lose out on that kind of equality, and that they're going to be losing a first round pick in the next 2 years. If they make the playoffs, probably this year. So they have to forfeit a first round pick. So they're not going to be giving themselves an abundance of extra assets to improve on this core. And it's already tough for them to acquire them via signing. So do I think that they necessarily have, that next level? I don't necessarily see it. Do I think a team like Columbus does? I would be more aligned with saying that Columbus has more of a potential to be a top team in the Metro, especially as, the Pittsburgh Penguins start going down. The New York Islanders, although they are pushing it off as much as they want, eventually will need to rebuild because that roster can't, right? They may be saved by the rising cap and keeping afloat, but eventually they'll have to, so I think Columbus is a team to watch. The Philadelphia Flyers is a team I expect to be in the bottom end of the standings next year, for example. I think, they have, I believe, 3 first-round picks going into this draft. Their own, Colorado's and Edmonton's, yes. So they have 3 first-round picks. They just acquired another second-round pick, so I believe they have a couple of those as well. They're well-stocked in terms of draft picks. In terms of top-end prospects, you can count on maybe 3 fingers, right? Like Matvei Michkov, Oliver Bonk, Jet Luchenko, really at like the forefront of that. And then you have other guys, whereas, and only Michkov is on the roster, right? Where you look at the Montreal Canadiens, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, right? Already on the roster. Lane Hudson, already on the roster. Cam Fowler, just doing well in the NCAA. Slavkovsky already in the NHL. But the thing with the Canadiens is that their best piece isn't there yet.